Boundaries are one of the greatest expressions of self-love, and yet they are so often misunderstood. Many people have been conditioned to believe that setting boundaries is harsh, selfish, or even cold. But the truth is, boundaries are not walls shut others out. They are bridges that protect the integrity of your emotional landscape. When you create clear boundaries, you are not pushing people away. You are inviting them to meet you with respect, clarity, and care. You are saying, this is where I end and where you begin. And in a world that constantly demands more of you, more time, more energy, more availability, your ability to draw that line is an act of radical courage. When you don't set boundaries, you teach people that it's acceptable to access you anytime, in any way, with no regard for your needs. You teach that your comfort is negotiable, that your time is flexible, that your peace is optional. And slowly, bit by bit, you begin to disappear in the name of being nice, or easygoing, or supportive. But being supportive should never mean being self-sacrificing. There is a massive difference between being generous and being depleted. Generosity comes from a place of abundance. Depletion comes from a lack of boundaries. Setting boundaries is not an act of aggression. It is an act of alignment. It is choosing to live in a way that honors your truth instead of betraying it. When you say no with clarity and calm, you are not being difficult. You are protecting your emotional bandwidth, your peace of mind, and your ability to show up fully for the people and projects that truly matter. Without boundaries, even the most compassionate person becomes bitter, resentful, and exhausted. And that bitterness doesn't happen overnight. It builds silently. Every time you say yes when your body is screaming no. Every time you remain quiet when your heart is aching to be heard. Every time you put someone else's comfort your well-being. You don't want anyone unlimited access to you. Just because someone is close to you, just because you love them, does not mean they are entitled to every piece of you. Love can be deep and still have limits. In fact, the deepest love often thrives within healthy limits. Boundaries protect not only the person set of them, but the relationship itself. They prevent silent resentment, emotional burnout, and emotional codependency. When you set a boundary, you're saying, I want this relationship to last, and in order for that to happen, I need to feel safe and respected in it. And let's be honest, setting boundaries is uncomfortable. It triggers fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of seemingly much. But here's the powerful truth. Discomfort is not the enemy. Avoiding discomfort is what leads to chaos, miscommunication, and internal chaos. Being uncomfortable for a moment is a small price to pay for protecting your peace in the long term. Every boundary you set teaches others how to engage with you in a healthy and constructive way. And the people who are meant to stay in our life, who truly care about your well-being, will not only respect those boundaries, they will appreciate them. They will rise to meet the version of you that chooses self-worth over self-neglect. It takes strength to speak up when you're used to staying silent. It takes courage to prioritize your emotional needs when you've spent a lifetime being the one who bends, adapts, and makes room. But strength and courage don't always roar. Sometimes the whisper, this is enough, not today, or I need time. Your boundaries may confuse or frustrate others at first, but that's okay. It's not your job to man other people's feelings about your limits. It's your job to honor your own. People who truly see you, who value you, will lean into understanding, even if it takes time. But people who only benefited from your lack of boundaries may resist. And their reaction is not a reflection of your wrongness, but of their entitlement. The most liberating truth you will ever realize is that you are not responsible for keeping others comfortable at the expense of your own sanity. You are not here to be constantly available, endlessly agreeable, or emotionally accessible on demand. You are allowed to be complex. You are allowed to have needs. You are allowed to say, this doesn't work for me. And you do not need to explain, justify, or apologize for protecting your inner world. Healthy boundaries create clarity. They create space for authentic connection. They create environments where mutual respect can grow. When you communicate your limits clearly and consistently, you are standing in your power, not because you want control over others, but because you refuse to let others control you. You are declaring that your life, your energy, your time are sacred. That your emotional capacity is not a resource to be exploited, that your peace matters. In a culture that often romanticizes overfunctioning and glorifies self-sacrifice, choosing boundaries can feel like rebellion. And it is a rebellion against the idea that where worth is measured by how much of yourself you give away. It is a rebellion against the pressure to say yes when every part of you wants to say no. It is a rebellion against the deep-lying greed belief that protecting your space makes you difficult or selfish. Boundaries do not make you less loving. They make your love sustainable. Boundaries do not shut others out. They invite the right people in under the right terms. Love is not measured by how much of yourself can lose in the process of holding someone else together. Somewhere along the way, especially for those who were taught to nurture before they were ever taught to protect themselves, we started confusing sacrifice with love. We began to believe that the more we give up, the more loyal we are, that the more pain we absorb, the more valuable our relationships become. That to love fully is to love without conditions, without limits, without pause. But that's not love. That's erosion. That's the slow and steady disappearance of your own needs, your voice, and your identity under the weight of someone else's comfort. Real love does not require the abandonment of self. Real love doesn't ask you to silence your needs, to shrink your dreams, or to carry burdens that were never yours to hold. There's a difference between standing by through their struggles and making their struggles your responsibility. There's a difference between supporting someone and sacrificing yourself so completely that forget who you were before they needed you. When love turns into a pattern of self-neglect, it is no longer sacred. It becomes survival. And survival is not sustainable. When you constantly prioritize someone else's happiness above your own emotional well-being, you're not practicing love, you're practicing avoidance. Avoidance of conflict, avoidance of abandonment, avoidance of guilt. But the love that endures is not the love that demands your exhaustion. It's the love that includes you, that sees you matter too. When you give until it hurts and call it loyalty, you set a dangerous precedent, not just for how others treat you, but for how you treat yourself. You teach yourself to ignore your exhaustion. You teach yourself to endure more than you should. And you begin to build your worth on how well you can endure emotional discomfort instead of how well you can be emotionally honest. Sacrifice without balance leads to bitterness. And that bitterness doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from all the times you stayed quiet when you needed to speak, from all the moments you pushed your pain aside to make room for someone else's comfort, from the endless times you chose to meet someone's needs while hoping, praying, silently aching that one day they'd notice yours. But love doesn't require you to be invisible. And if someone only values what you can do for them, not who you are when you have nothing left to give, then you are not in a partnership. You're in a transaction. Sacrifice has its place in relationships. Of course, there are moments when we give more than we receive, when we bend, when we stretch, when we meet our loved ones in the middle of their chaos. But those moments should be exceptions, not the rule. Love without balance is not love. It's obligation dressed in pretty words. When giving becomes the default and receiving is always out of reach, you begin to disappear in your own story. And the people around you become so accustomed to your selflessness that they stop seeing it altogether. It's easy to fall into the role of the one who always gives, especially if you've been raised to believe that being a good person means never saying no, never pushing back, never walking away. But goodness is not about self-sacrifice. True goodness includes the ability to protect your soul, to say, this is what I need too, and to not feel guilty for wanting a love that is mutual, reciprocal, and real. The kind of love that says, I see your needs, not just mine. I value your energy, not just what you do for me. I hold your heart as carefully as I hold my own. When you measure love by how much pain you can endure, you start to wear that pain like a badge of honor. You begin to think that suffering means you're doing something right. But it doesn't. Your suffering is not proof of your devotion. Your exhaustion is not evidence of your commitment. You don't need to break yourself apart to prove your loyalty. You don't have to give endlessly to deserve to be chosen. Love thrives in mutual effort, in being held as much as you hold, in being heard as much as you listen, in being valued for who you are, not just for how well you play the role of the fixer, the helper, the one who never asks for too much. Love doesn't live in the shadows of sacrifice. It lives in the light of truth, transparency, and emotional reciprocity. You are not unlovable because you have needs. You are not too much because you ask for rest, for space, for understanding. You are allowed to want a love that includes you in the picture, not one that expects you to stay behind the scenes. When you find yourself constantly overacting, constantly explaining, constantly hoping for something more while pretending everything is fine, it's not love keeping you there. It's fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being rejected, of being labeled selfish. But your needs are not a threat. Your voice is not too loud. Your desire to be seen, cared for, and prioritized is not a burden. It's the most human thing in the world. You cannot build a healthy relationship on the foundation of self-denial. You cannot keep giving from a place that is already empty and call it love. There is nothing noble about loving someone in a way that destroys you. There is nothing brave about staying in a space where you are valued only for how little you ask. Real love invites your wholeness. Real love makes room for your complexity. Real love says, you don't have to keep proving yourself that we're in your place here. And until you find that kind of love, the most important work you can do is stop sacrificing yourself in the name of the version you hope others will one day become. Every relationship you enter, every friendship you maintain, every space you step into are constantly teaching people how to treat you. Not always through words, but through your actions, your silences, your choices, and what you're willing to accept. The truth is, people don't just know how to love you, they learn. And their teacher is you. If you consistently show up without ever asking for anything in return, if you always say yes, when your soul is begging for no, if you laugh disrespect just to keep the peace, you're not just surviving, you're training the world around you to believe that your boundaries don't matter, that your worth is negotiable, that your needs are optional. This isn't about blame. It's about awareness. It's about recognizing how often we betray ourselves just to maintain a fragile sense of belonging. because we all want to be chosen. We all want to be accepted. And sometimes a desire becomes so loud that we start tolerating things we once said we never would. We stay silent when we should speak. We stay put when we should walk away. We stay available when we should be resting. And each time we do, we send a silent message, this is okay with me, even when it's not, especially when it's not. Tolerating mistreatment or emotional neglect doesn't make you more loving. It makes you invisible to people who never took the time to truly see you. You think you're being patient, understanding, loyal, but what you're really doing is teaching someone that they can keep giving you less and you'll still stay. That they don't have to meet your emotional needs because you've never made those needs non-negotiable. That your time, your energy, your love, it's always available, even when it's not respected. There is a silent power in unspoken patterns, and those patterns speak louder than any conversation ever could. If someone only calls when they need something and you always answer, you've taught them that your time is not protected. If someone consistently dismisses your feelings and you let it slide every time, you've taught them that your emotions are disposable. If someone disappears whenever it's and you welcome them back without question, you've taught them that your presence requires no accountability. And the more these patterns are repeated, the more deeply they become ingrained. You need to yell to teach someone a lesson. You don't need ultimatums or dramatic exits. What you need is clarity. Quiet, unwavering clarity. Boundaries that are enforced, not just spoken. Standards that are lived, not just written down in journals or whispered to your closest friend. People can only meet you at the level you meet yourself. And when you allow behavior that drains, disrespects, or diminishes you, you're not only letting someone else fall short, you're falling short on your own self-worth. So many of us are taught that love means vilngayasi to love. That if we make ourselves small enough, low maintenance enough, selfless enough, we'll finally be seen. But that kind of love is conditional. It is based on performance, not presence. It's about what you do, not who you are. And as long as you keep performing, you'll never truly feel loved. You'll feel tolerated. And no one deserves to feel like they are merely tolerated in the spaces where they give their heart. You teach people how to treat you not by what you say you want, but by what you allow to continue. You can write down your worth on every mirror in your house, but if you keep accepting less than what honors that worth, it becomes just a mantra with no meaning. Worth isn't just a belief. It's a boundary. It's a standard. It's a behavior. And when people see you treating yourself with honor, they learn that honor is the only acceptable way to engage with you. Teaching people how to treat you is not out control. It's about ownership. Owning your role in your relationships. Owning your patterns. Owning the hard truth that sometimes we the ones who set the bar so low just to feel something that looks like love. But love without respect is not love. And respect doesn't happen by accident. It's created. It's reinforced. It's demanded not through aggression, but through consistency. You have every right to raise your standards, to stop normalizing emotional inconsistency, to stop making excuses for people who only show up when it's convenient, to walk away from those who ignore your boundaries and then blame you for being too sensitive when you finally speak up. You're not too sensitive. You're finally becoming aware. You're finally noticing the cracks in the foundation that you were told to ignore. You're finally realizing that being low maintenance often just means you were conditioned to expect very little. And there is no reward in being the person who never complains, never asks, never says, this isn't okay. That silence doesn't make you stronger. It makes you disappear. The only way to stop being taken for granted is to stop granting access to people who refuse to rise to the standard of mutual respect, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in truth, the truth that your love is not a vending machine, that your energy is not endless, that your loyalty is not a license to be mistreated. You are worthy of love that doesn't ask you to compromise your self-respect. You are worthy of spaces that don't expect you to tolerate emotional laziness. And you are worthy of relationships that require you to trade your dignity for temporary closeness. The moment you start showing up with that energy, the entire landscape of your life begins to shift. People will rise or they will fall away. But either way, you will no longer be standing in a space that teaches others that your value can be discounted. There is a powerful myth that silence equals strength, that if you bite your tongue, hold your breath, and carry on without confrontation, you're doing the noble thing. That staying quit is the high road. That letting things go is a mark of maturity. And while there is wisdom in choosing your battles, there's also a dangerous cost in becoming so silent that your truth has no space to breathe. Because silence, when rooted in fear, is not peace, it is suppression. It is the slow erasure of your voice, your needs, your identity. Speaking up isn't always loud. It doesn't require shooting conflict or confrontation. It begins quietly, sometimes in the smallest moments, when you finally say, that hurt me, or I don't feel okay with this, or I need something different. And those words carry weight, not because they're dramatic or angry, but because they're honest. Because they represent a moment when you chose your truth over your fear. When you stopped protecting someone else's comfort at the expense of your own clarity. So many people, especially those who were raised to please, avoid conflict, or maintain harmony at all costs, develop a deep belief that speaking up will ruin relationships. That if they say how they really feel, that they'll push people away. That if they assert their needs, they'll be seen as difficult or demanding. And so they quiet, they smile when they want to scream. They agree when they feel resentful. They minimize their pain because they've taught their pain is a problem. But the truth is, what damages relationships far more than honesty is resentment. Resentment that grows in silence, fed by every unmet need, every unspoken disappointment, every internal scream that never found its way to words. Over time, that resentment becomes a wall. A thick, invisible barrier that disconnects you from the very people you're trying to hold close. And suddenly, you're no longer in a relationship, you're in a performance where you play the role of teasy. Understanding? I'm bothered. While internally you're screaming to be seen. Your voice matters, not just in moments of extreme conflict, but in everyday interactions, in the small things that accumulate, the comments that sting, the behaviors that drain you, the habits that make you feel like you're invisible. Every time you speak up, you teach people that you are a living, breathing, feeling human being, not a vessel for their comfort or convenience. You teach them that your love is strong enough to hold truth, that your relationships are built on honesty, not pretense, that closeness doesn't require silence, it requires safety. And yes, speaking up will make some people uncomfortable. Some will resist. Some will deflect. Some will try to guilt into going back to the version of you that was easier to manage, the one who didn't ask for much. But that discomfort is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that your honesty is disrupting a pattern. And disruption, while uncomfortable, is often necessary for transformation. The only relationships worth keeping are ones that can hold space for your truth without collapsing under the weight of it. There's a difference between being kind and being compliant. Being kind means you speak with compassion. Being compliant means you silence yourself to avoid friction. But friction is not failure. Friction is growth. Friction is what happens when two people show up as their full selves and work through the edges. And if someone can only love the version of you that stays silent, then they do not truly love you. They love or obedience. They love the way you make them feel, not the truth of who you are. It's easy to convince yourself that keeping quiet will keep the peace. But peace that requires your silence is not peace. It's quit oppression. It's the kind of peace that robs you of your aliveness, that steals your joy, that leaves you drained and disconnected from yourself. And over time, it becomes harder and harder to even identify what you want or need because you've spent so long pushing it down. Reclaiming your voice isn't just about a people. It's about reconnecting with yourself. It's about learning to trust that your feelings are valid, that your needs are important, and that your truth is worth speaking, even if your voice shakes. Speaking up is not about being right. It's about being real. It's about being in alignment with yourself. It's about being able to look in the mirror and say, I told the truth. I honored my heart. I stood up for what mattered, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's not received well, even when it means risking disapproval. Because self-respect is built in those moments. Confidence is built in those moments. Integrity is built in those moments. You are not too emotional. You are not too sensitive. You are not too harsh. You are simply someone who has been taught to downplay your truth in exchange for acceptance. But real acceptance doesn't come at the cost of your voice. Real acceptance says, tell me who you are, and I will meet you there. It says, speak your truth and I will listen, not to argue, but to understand. The world doesn't need more people who stay silent. It needs people who are willing to speak even when it's hard, who are willing to name what isn't working, who are willing to advocate for themselves, not out of ego, but out of love, for their own spirit, for their future, for the version of themselves they are becoming. When you speak up, you disrupt generations of conditioning, you break patterns, you create new possibilities, you open doors to deeper, more meaningful connections, not just with others, but with yourself. Sometimes the most powerful statement you make is your absence. It's not about storming out, slamming doors, or making declarations meant to wound. It's about quietly, deliberately removing your energy from places that have forgotten how valuable that energy truly is. When your presence has been taken for granted, when your words fall on deaf ears, when your care is consumed but never reciprocated, when your consistency is met with indifference. There comes a point where continuing to stay only serves to reinforce the message that disrespect is acceptable. And that message doesn't just affect how others see you. It begins to shape how you see yourself. There's a certain kind of strength in choosing not to argue anymore, not to beg, not to chase, not to keep explaining your worth to people are committed to misunderstanding it. At first, walking away may feel like defeat, especially if you're the one who always stayed, the one who forgave quickly, the one who made excuses for others because saw their potential. But letting go is not quitting. It's choosing yourself after too many moments of being chosen last. And it's in that space of stepping back and everything begins to become clearer, not just to them, but to you. When you leave a space that once drained you, something profound happens. The silence you leave behind begins to echo louder than anything you could have said while you were still there. Your absence becomes a mirror. It reflects back every ignored boundary, every dismissed feeling, every taken for granted moment that was softened by your presence. People begin to notice the little things they overlooked in the way you listened without judgment, the way you showed up even when it was inconvenient, the way you held space for emotions no one else wanted to acknowledge. But they notice it too late. Because those things were never meant to be invisible. They only became invisible when you stopped valuing them yourself. You don't need to seek revenge or deliver harsh truths to make someone realize your worth. Sometimes the most powerful truth is in the void you leave behind. The messages go unread. The calls are not returned. The routines they relied on are broken, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, because there's something sacred about reclaiming your time, your energy, your peace. There's something incredibly healing about no longer investing in someone who made you feel like option. You begin to realize that the version of that tolerated crumbs was a version trying to survive on hope, and hope without evidence is not a strategy. It's a cycle. Absence creates perspective. It forces people to feel what they were distracted or entitled to notice before. The truth is, people get used to your light when you're always shining. They grow comfortable in the warmth of your loyalty. They forget that effort isn't one-sided. And they begin to believe that you'll always be there, regardless of how little they pour back into you. That's why your silence is so loud, because it disrupts a pattern. It removes the comfort of assumption. It says without words, you no longer have unrestricted access to me. And that disruption isn't just a wake-up call for them. It's a turning point for you. You begin to see the parts of yourself you've been neglecting in the name of keeping someone else emotionally comfortable. You start to notice how heavy it was to carry both your needs and theirs. And you feel the difference in your mind, in your spirit, when you're no longer stretching yourself to be enough for someone who never tried to meet you halfway. In your absence, you remember who you were before made, validation, or compass. It's not easy to pull back when your instinct is to hold on. It goes against everything you've been taught about love, about endurance, about being the bigger person. But endurance without mutual effort is not love. It's silent suffering. And there is no wisdom in staying where you are unseen, no strength in giving endlessly where you're unappreciated. True love, whether romantic or familial, can only grow where mutual recognition exists, where both people are willing to learn, to change, to show up fully. Without that, you're not a relationship. You're in a pattern of overextending yourself just to feel temporarily significant. Choosing absence is not just an act of strength. It's an act of trust. Trust that the right people will notice, that the right people will do the work, that the space you create by stepping back will eventually be filled with something far more meaningful than what you were forcing yourself to hold together. It's trusting that the energy you used to invest in someone else's growth can now be redirected into your own, that your healing begins where your tolerance ends. That letting go makes space for something better, not just externally, but internally. When you walk away, you stop begging someone else to do what you can finally do for yourself. Affirm your worth. You stop looking outward for permission to feel enough. You begin to understand that your presence is not an unlimited resource, that access to you is something sacred, not assumed. And as difficult as it is to step back from people you once loved deeply, it is far more painful to stay in a space that asks you to abandon yourself daily. There is no punishment in your absence, only clarity, only consequence, only truth. You are not trying to hurt anyone. You are simply refusing to hurt yourself anymore. You are honoring the version of you that once settled, once begged, once waited, by becoming the version who longer needs to. You are not closing a door out of bitterness. You are simply no longer holding it open for those who walked through it with ever wiping their feet. Your absence is not a reaction. It's a revelation. It's the moment you realize that love should never require to stay somewhere you are not valued. There comes a moment in every journey when in relationships, career, or personal growth, when you realize being kind is not the same as being a doormat. Vulnerability is not permission for someone to misuse your presence, and love in its truest form doesn't mean you shrink yourself to keep someone else comfortable. So let's start here. Let's start with the discomfort, because truth be told, you didn't just show up in someone's life. You invested time, energy, compassion, care. You stayed when others walked away. You held space when no one else knew how. You offered softness in a world that glorifies hardness. And now you find yourself questioning if any of it ever mattered. You feel the weight of being taken for granted, and it stings. We live in a world that constantly asks us to prove ourselves, to be available, to be dependable, to be emotionally generous, to show up in ways that stretch us. And we're the kind of person who leads with empathy, with loyalty, with quiet strength. People begin to expect your presence as part of the furniture, always there, always reliable, always comfortable. But your presence is not furniture. Your presence is a living, breathing, powerful offering. It's a gift that costs you something every time you extend it. Your time, energy, your peace, your emotional labor. And when someone begins to act like your showing up is automatic, it's time to pause and recognize what that really means. Because when someone sees you as constant, they can forget how rare it is to be held the way you hold them. They can forget that your compassion is not on tap. They can forget that your consistency is not their entitlement. Being available is often mistaken for obligation. But you are not obligated to stay where you're not appreciated. You are not obligated to give what is not being received with care. When people start to confuse your love with weakness, your loyalty with naivety, and your silence with surrender, they begin to diss the truth of who you are. And it's easy, far too easy, for people to fall into the trap of believing that just because you've always been there, you always will be. But constancy doesn't win invisibility. Your presence should never be so taken for granted that your absence wouldn't leave a ripple. The truth is, people start to forget the value of what they don't have to work for, fight for, or earn. And when they forget, it's not a reflection of your worth. It's not a reflection of their inability to recognize the sacred. Every time you show up for someone, especially in moments when it would have been easier to walk away, you are making a choice, a powerful, conscious choice, and that choice deserves recognition. You are not a default setting in someone's life. You are not a placeholder until they find something more exciting or convenient. You are a whole universe of support, patience, encouragement, and depth, and that matters. But it only matters if the people around understand what it means to be in the presence of someone who carries that kind of energy. And if they don't, it's not your job to beg them to see it. It's your responsibility to remember it for yourself. So many of us have been conditioned to believe that our value comes from how much we can give. We've been taught to suppress our needs, to show up even when we're exhausted, to prioritize others' emotions over our own. And slowly, without even noticing, we begin to believe that our presence is just part of the background, something others can lean on without ever how much weight we're carrying. But being someone's emotional anchor is not a role you take on without consequence. It takes strength. It takes resilience. And it takes a level of internal grounding that should never be dismissed or minimized. When people begin to rely on you without gratitude, they stop seeing you. They stop acknowledging the humanity behind the support. And that's when you have to step back and ask yourself, have I mistaken my worth for my usefulness? Because that's what being taken for granted really is. It's being seen only for what you offer, not for who you are. It's being treated like a service instead of a soul. And that is one of the most painful experiences someone with a kind heart can endure. You start to question yourself. You start to wonder if maybe you're asking much just by wanting to be noticed, to be appreciated, to be seen. But you're not asking too much. You're asking the bare minimum. To be valued, to be acknowledged, to be loved in return with the same intentionality you give so freely. And if that's not being offered back to you, then it's time to reevaluate what your presence really means in that space. Your presence is a privilege, not a promise. You are not here to serve endlessly with no nourishment in return. You are not here to continue sacrificing your mental and emotional well-being for people who think you'll never leave. Because there is power in choosing to walk away when the value of your presence has been forgotten. There is strength in recognizing that just because someone is used to you being around doesn't mean they deserve to keep benefiting from your energy. Your worth is not tied to your availability. It's not tied to your silence. It's certainly not tied to how long you can endure being overlooked. When someone starts to act like your love is limitless, your compassion is renewable on demand, and your time is disposable, that's when you have to reclaim your presence. You have to look in the mirror and remember what it costs you to keep showing up. Not just the time or effort, but the emotional investment, the vulnerability, the internal work it takes to stay soft in a world that constantly hardens. You are not ordinary. The way you care, the way you support, the way you give out, always needing recognition. That's extraordinary. But extraordinary doesn't mean endless. It doesn't mean unpaid, unnoticed, or unappreciated. Being present is a decision, and it should be met with reverence, not routine. It should be met with mutual respect, not silent expectation. When people expect you to show up no matter how they treat you, they have lost sight of what it means to deserve you. And when they forget that, it becomes your duty not to keep proving your worth, but to remind yourself that your energy is sacred, and sacred things do not belong where they are taken lightly